the for lack of a better term, what we call in the press now the RSA hack,
right,
which I know your boss has talked about at length in the RSA show, and people in your organization have talked about at length. Is there a heightened sensitivity and awareness to make sure that, make sure this never happens again kind of thing in your organization, that you're always, stepping on, pins and needles, as it were?
So I think, certainly one of the mandates I had coming into RSA was to look at, across the board, both what we could do internally to sort of recognize how we were facing advanced actors. In the case of our specific attack from last year, nation-sponsored attack, but across the board. I mean, being a public company, we have a profile that's often the target of hacktivist groups. We have a profile that's a target of what some people are calling cyber terror type of outfits, and certainly we have a huge business that's associated with takedowns in the cyber criminal world. So, we looked at that really closely. I think, we've talked about this in the press in the past, but there's been a lot of work we've done relative to visibility, improving our network visibility in a lot of areas, and then, looking at innovative ways to do additional isolation and control, especially of critical processes. I think the biggest thing that is worth mentioning is that in many organizations, including ours, the traditional approach would be, let's measure security against a standard like ISO 27001 or FISMA, or pick something, right? And what I did when I came in is said, well, let's put that a little bit on a secondary thread, and instead let's focus on what are our most critical material assets, and how do we associate anything that we're looking at, whether it's control structures, incidents, events, anything that we're doing, any investments that we make against adversarial relationships and attacks to those critical assets. Anything that falls below that line we'll get to. But the most important things that we're going to do is the relationship between attacks and attackers, most critical assets, and then visibility and control that we do around that. So, the fallout of things like ISO and compliance, those become natural byproducts of good security, but, we don't try to just secure things so that somebody could put a seal on a window somewhere, or
sure.
We don't treat everything the same way.
But just to argue with the devil's advocate, compliance and having that seal is something that federal agencies and others see as a criteria for buying. So how do you measure that need for people to have that stamp of kosher, stamp of seal of something that says this is good, versus your argument? You're saying there are other things you need to look beyond that.
I actually think it's a misguided interpretation and I don't mean that I'm saying to you.
Yeah.
I mean, in other words, that organizations that buy products based on seals or based on certifications, I think it's a misguided interpretation.
Okay.
I would argue that if you were to look at where there's value, certainly high assurance certifications, where, for example, you move products into things like common criteria EAL 3.3+,
sure,
where there's a detailed evaluation, and that evaluation needs to be updated with every major release of a product, and there's discipline in the environment, and it's scoped very tightly. I think that's an example of a well done certification process where you could put some value and scope around that process, where you're taking a generalized security framework that has 10 generalized domains, and then say, well, how does this apply to a security program that has many, many different aspects to it across multiple technologies that are very, very difficult to evaluate properly, and then where it's a point-in-time evaluation. I would put not as much faith in that. And we've seen sort of the risks associated with putting faith in that, where organizations that have had high-profile hacks who have then said, yes, but we're PCI certified, or yes, but we're ISO certified. So I think there has to be a balance in that measurement.
So when you're, just to put words in your mouth, EAL common criteria, I'm a fan of as well, but so then EAL common criteria, in your estimation, is a better type of a more rigorous process than, say, a PCI DSS 2.0 stamp of approval?
I believe so, because I believe it's scoped very narrowly.
Yeah.
For example, you could take an individual product and you could scope it narrowly around a set of protection profiles,
yeah,
around a certain type of definition. And then as long as you take that for the value that it's actually worth, and then realize that even with that certification, there's a whole concept of operations that needs to be built around it, right? Because you're sort of accepting that the security has been evaluated in that product given certain constraints, yeah, that the product has from a security perspective. Now, given those constraints, how do we build a concept of operations around that and continually monitor, yeah, that that concept of operations is carried out effectively? So in that narrow scope, I think that there's value in that. I think that when you blow that out and say, well, can I do everything in a security program to that level of effectiveness, and have someone just for the sake of argument come in and over the course of 2 weeks to a month, yeah, evaluate that a program somehow passes muster? It's the difference between a year of review of something and a couple of weeks of analysis. I would argue that the EAL 3+, for example, it provides more value given all of the other things that I suggested that you add to it.
Got it. So then when you're talking to your management and then to RSA clients who need to be assured that you have proper security, how can you assure them of the integrity of your processes if whether it's PCI DSS or ISO is not the right stamp of approval? What sort of proof points can you provide to them as integrity checks? So
I didn't say that it's never the right stamp of approval, but what it is it's a tool that's used in certain situations. Yeah. Okay, so for example, let's think about a program like product security, for example. In product security, what you want to do is have a series of different life cycle activities that you're going to carry out that are highly disciplined, that sort of resemble quality management activities, yeah, and that you're constantly moving the bar up in some way. Now, as part of those activities, you're going to establish what are sensible other types of artifacts or certifications that make sense given the area in which you're working. For example, if you're working in an area where there's credit card data involved, the control structures may dictate that, well, let's look at the PCI control set and see where it marries up with that in an operating environment. If you're in a healthcare type of situation and HIPAA high trust is meaningful, sure, there, and so on. So again, I think, but it is a question of really applying those control sets in a given situation. I don't think that we should be simply driving towards some standard just because somebody says, oh, it makes sense to do this, as opposed to really trying to define what is the right situation given the asset that we have, and given how that asset is utilized, and given how the data that's there, and given the adversarial landscape. So it's a much more dynamic approach. It's a much more tailored approach than I think we've had in the past, where somebody might say, well, because somewhere in the business you handle PCI data, therefore everything must have a PCI scope in some way. And while that's an interesting concept, I'm more interested in tailoring specific work that we do to either much more stringent security concepts or constraints than PCI, or not even have some things reviewed to that level. It just depends.
And when I think net witness, I think broader visibility, something that RSA didn't have on its own. So how does that net witness technology, new and old, then give your management and your customers, if they need to see anything, visibility that you may not have had, say, 2 years ago, into what's actually happened at a broad enterprise level?
I think where net witness is evolving and is this notion that when you think about things that happen pre-breach and post-breach, right? Pre-breach, you're trying to, and I don't mean our breach, I mean in general, right? Pre-breach, you're trying to, stop bad things from happening. And if you think about the failings of traditional technologies and all of that, and then you go down to the exhibition hall here and you go, well, give me the next generation everything that's supposed to stop all the bad things from happening. I mean, even if you throw all of those pre-breach technologies in and you have this continuum of stuff that's supposed to stop everything, you're still going to have to assign a confidence factor to that and say, okay, given all of this, I still have end users, I still have defects, I still have bugs, I still have changes in the threat landscape. So in that moment that something, whether it's a defect in an IT technology or in a human process or whatever, something crosses that threshold into a breach in your defenses, what does that world look like in terms of post-breach? At NetWitness, our original idea was, that we, by adding full packet capture to the mix, you're adding content and context to traditional event management, right? Here's something that pops up, oh, let's see what it really means. But where we've evolved is we've taken logs and full packet and fused them all together in a common data schema. So in other words, where things like Active Directory objects or other types of objects that previously were sort of sitting out there, there's a normalization that occurs now, where everything, if you said, show me everything Eddie did, you could see it across all data types, for all logs, for full packet, and really as an end user, you're not initially going to distinguish one type from another, but even that's not enough, because the idea would be, well, you're still living in this island, which is your organization, and we know certainly from what we learned last year that the bringing data from the outside world in, for example, government agencies have interesting data. There's all these pay-per-view services out there, with threat intel. There's open source communities that are very, very good, that are producing threat intel, and there's obviously things that we produce on our own. To take that universe of data and fuse that with now this larger data construct of full packet data, logs, asset management information, physical security information, and munge that all together in some way, and then provide an open analytic interface where we can do complex event processing, think like correlation and things like that, long-term, based on things like Hadoop and so on, long-term views into the data, and then real-time based on the NetWitness framework, but in a single analytic interface. That's really, really powerful. So that's where we've evolved. We're now able to do all of that log stuff and full packet fusion, and with the NetWitness Live framework, all the third-party data. And we demoed that at Black Hat last year. But what we're showing now is the unified analytic framework, where we can take all of those previous point solution capabilities like DLP, correlation, network investigation in a single UI, single API, and then allow you to access from a normalized viewpoint all of these back-end big data. And through the rest of this year, what you're going to see is more and more ways to just continue to plug more and more data into that. So, I mean, people have talked in the industry about this idea of active defense for a while, right? I mean, what does that really mean? We've kind of started to call it remediation, but I don't know what it's going to be called in the end. But the things that we learn coming out of this process, this analytic process. Some people, in the past have talked about signatures or other types of things. I don't know really, what the end artifact is, because in some cases it would manifest itself as a firewall rule. In some cases it might be an IPS or signature, but there are other more complex variables that it could be, an MD5 hash. I mean, there's all kinds of possibilities. So we have a number of partners that are on that pre-breach side. Some of the network device vendors, firewall vendors, even some of the AV partners that we've been working with since last year. That basically, what we've been building is this ability to once something meets certain criteria, to just automatically create a feed into their technology that creates the right artifact. Now, one of the hang-ups that's always existed in this space, and I'm sure you know this, is people have technologies like NIPS and HIPS and all these things and never implement the blocking in it, or they only implement certain things that they know are absolutely stupid, and are a no-brainer to block, as opposed to really taking something and going, look, we figured this out. It's gone through either a human review, or it's so obviously not a false positive that we should just implement it. So the issue becomes, how do we gain enough of a confidence level that we can have the machine just accept the remediation rule in an automated manner. And I think that's where the industry has to evolve, because if we don't start getting to the point where we're willing to accept automation in that 360, we're never going to catch up here.